Hi, this is Paul, and I'm doing a conversation today with Reverend Andrew Bianc. I graduated from Calvin Seminary in 1991, and he graduated in 2000, so he's in a generation behind me, but he's a minister in Burnaby, British Columbia. That's right outside of Vancouver. And one of the things I noticed was when I was talking about Jordan Peterson and some online communities within the Christian Reformed Church, Andrew was too. So I wanted to do a conversation with Andrew and introduce you all to him and find out what's going on. So thanks for joining me today, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Why don't you describe a little bit why you got into the ministry? I know a lot of people are curious about pastors. We're kind of mysterious creatures to them. Where did you grow up, and why did you get into the ministry, and how long have you been in it?
Okay. I grew up in a town next to Toronto called Oakville, and never intended to go into the ministry. I grew up in a Christian home and have been part of the Christian Reformed Church all my life. But my first career was in engineering, and I worked as a mechanical engineer for Ford Motor Company for 6 years, and quite frankly, never envisioned myself as a pastor, but it's a long story, but I felt like God was encouraging me to consider going into the ministry. And through a variety of different experiences, which I won't get into here, really sensed that was the way that the Lord was leading. So eventually left my position at Ford and went to Calvin Seminary and began as a pastor in 2000. Served a church in Hamilton, Ontario for 9 years, and have been here in Burnaby now for 8 years.
Okay.
So I think what got me into the ministry in a nutshell was a season of discipleship as a young adult, just having gotten married, that my wife and I went through, and was deeply impacted by the love of God for me in a way that I had not experienced growing up, and a fresh encounter with God through that discipleship experience, which really made me love not only God, but His church. And I began serving His church as an engineer, though, but serving in different capacities, thinking I could be a great engineer and be a good Christian, and people encouraged me to think about going in the ministry. And so, it's been a good change. I loved engineering, but I don't regret the way God's led. So.
Oh, wonderful. Why don't you describe your church a little bit for us?
So we are a suburban urban setting here in Burnaby, suburban setting, but kind of have an urban pull. It's a church that's about 65 years old, began by Dutch immigrants that came after the Second World War, but are located in a quite an ethnically diverse neighborhood. That the neighborhood has changed dramatically in the last 25 years. Certainly in the last 5 years, as a congregation, we've begun to see some of that diversity reflected in our church. We have had a strong sense of call to this community over the years in different ways, whether it's been to new immigrants that have moved into the area. We have a preschool that is very community focused. So in the last, certainly the last 5 to 10 years have really felt, as a church, we need to reflect the character of our neighborhood, and we've been praying about that and really allowed God to try and lead us to become a kind of community that reflects that diversity. So you come to our church now, and there's certainly some Dutchness there, but there's also a lot of Asian and variety of different cultures, Iranian, So we are no longer the white church that we were when we began, which you'll find many people in our church would say, yeah, this is a gift of God. We're so grateful for the richness, that the diversity of God's God's family brings. Yeah. So.
Okay. And you mentioned before too, you've had a pretty good student ministry. You've
Yeah.
folded a
Yeah.
lot of students.
We about 7 years ago, we began connecting with students from SFU, international students from Simon Fraser University here in Burnaby, a place in New West called Douglas College, and some other schools. We've partnered with an organization called International Student Ministries of Canada, which is a ministry on the campuses of these schools. And international students come, they're lonely. They come to a strange place to study. They often don't know anybody. They're far away from home. What better for the church to do than to show Christian hospitality and just befriend and help them get some exposure to our culture. And many of them come with an eagerness to learn about our culture. So we've had a wonderful ministry to international students, seen many of them worship with us. We have a home, actually. Our church has a house called Mosaic House that we own, and that's a ministry or a home for female international students. We recently began a home for male international students called Risen House. So I've often said to people that it's the international students that came that had patience with us when we had a lot of cultural blind spots, that had patience with us for blunders that we made maybe culturally, because they appreciated, I think, our willingness to invite them into our homes and have them over for Thanksgiving dinner and such. But they gave us a love for people of different cultures, and that now I think our community is sensing too. So yeah, it's been good.
That's wonderful. Now the reason I wanted to talk to you is because, again, you were pretty early on in terms of my the attention that I was paying to Jordan Peterson. Now you're in Canada, so this is a little bit closer to home for you. When did you first come across Jordan Peterson, and why did you get interested in what was going on?
I was first introduced to him around the time when a piece of legislation called Bill C-16 was being discussed by our Canadian Parliament. And this was a bill that, among other things, was putting into legislation the need to grant specific rights of gender expression, gender identity, and it was closely connected to some of the things that the Ontario Human Rights Commission was purporting in terms of ensuring that organizations, government organizations in particular, schools, were speaking about or using particular language concerning transgender, and a variety of things. But Peterson was resisting some of the ideology that was behind what he saw behind Bill C-16. And many people were quite upset with him because of his refusal to use what he called legislated speech. You know, he was very concerned that our government was requiring a certain kind of speech regarding, particularly in this case, regarding sexual minorities. And that just created a real backlash on his campus at U of T. But it shot him into the spotlight. He got, and that's when I was introduced to him. I started watching a few of his videos where he kind of defended his position. And I thought, here's the fellow that is bringing, I thought, a reasoned thoughtfulness to this issue and helping us see the way in which this legislation really was potentially undermining free speech, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. So I was intrigued by that. And I also, as a pastor, I kind of felt like, though he didn't use quote, Christian language or biblical language per se, I kind of felt like he had a underpinning or a grounding that had sensitivity to a Christian worldview, that had sensitivity to a kind of overarching narrative that we need to pay attention to. And so I kind of listened to things that he wasn't saying explicitly, and I thought, oh, this guy's interesting. So he caught my attention, and I kept paying attention to some of the things he was saying, and I watched a number of his videos on YouTube. So yeah, that's what originally, and then when he shared later, so this would have been in the when was it? How does time flies now? Spring of last year, I think, the biblical series.
Yeah, it was spring of 2017.
Of 2017. I listened to those lectures, and he approaches the biblical stories as in some ways as a materialist, as with an evolutionary psychology background, but boy, he identifies things that as a pastor, I thought, hey, this stuff sounds right, and in our tradition, we really believe in God's activity in creation. He reveals himself through creation, so he reveals himself through good psychology. He reveals himself through good science and good anthropology, and so as I listened to Peterson, who doesn't identify himself as a Christian, kind of explaining these narratives, I thought, I hear God's voice through some of this. I really do. I felt like he was touching on some things that I could say in a sermon, and yeah. Yeah, I could say more, but he captured my attention.
Well, has he been leaking into your sermons?
Yeah, well, a little bit. Yeah, I quoted him a little bit here and there. I've certainly mentioned to my congregation that I'm listening to him. I have shared on a number of occasions some of the things that he teaches or has shared, even in some of those the biblical stories lecture series. So yeah.
Why, both of us have pastor friends who are in the Toronto area, and there's plenty of empty seats in their churches. And sometimes as pastors, it seems, we can't drag people in here to listen to our sermons. And this guy's charging people to go and listen to him for, people, your sermon goes a bit over a half hour, people start to grumble. This guy's going 2 hours plus. They're paying to see it. Why? What do you think's going on?
Yeah. Well, I do think in some respects, there's a confluence of things that are happening in our culture, even within our country in Canada, but more broadly, globally too, a confluence of things that are happening. And Peterson happens to be at the right place at the right time in history. And so I think he's skyrocketed just because of how things have come together, whether it's politically in Canada or even in the United States but I think that one of the things that a lot of people are drawn to is, we're as human beings, we're always looking for meaning. We're meaning makers. We're craving meaning. We're craving something that we can anchor our lives to. And yeah, in our culture in Canada, we say we're pretty secular, and you take away people's stories and their meaning, they're looking for something. And Peterson, he quite passionately speaks about meta narratives. He passionately speaks about the need for meaning in our life, and then he is quite sympathetic to the way in which the the Christian influence on the West, and so he, talks about the Bible, connects different science and psychology to the Bible, and so there is a Christian memory in our culture, and I think Peterson may be tapping into that somewhat distant Christian memory. He's tapping into people's need for meaning, and he's catching their attention. And I know one of the critiques that people have had of him is it's mainly a male audience that he connects with, a white male audience. And that, I think that's probably true. I don't have anything to disprove that, but you could argue that a lot of white males are feeling like they're losing a sense of meaning. I mean, the culture can be critical of them, and maybe at times rightly so, but they can be criticized because they're male and they're white, and so maybe Peterson is capturing them with, helping them feel like they do have purpose and meaning and value, and giving them a story to connect their lives to. I think that's a little bit of what he's doing, and people are saying, and I've heard a number of these kind of testimonies, if you call them that he's changed my life. People are saying that he has helped me, one of his clean up my room, clean up my mess, and when I hear the kind of things that he's sharing, as a Christian pastor, we sometimes say similar kinds of things to our congregations about, we call it obedience, obedience to the Word of God. Repentance, we need to turn away from sin and turn to Christ and put on the new self, die to the old self and come to life. So we have very rich theological language, but Peterson uses similar kinds of ideas and language that, maybe isn't nuanced quite the same way. But so I hear all that stuff and I think, hey, there's a lot of echoes of the Christian message in reverberating in some of his talks and his, so.
I've had, quite a few people write me. Some of them are looking for churches. Do you think there's room in church for people who are curious and wanting to explore because Jordan Peterson has somehow God-pilled them?
Mm.
I mean, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think there has to be room in our churches for people with those kinds of questions and those kinds of curiosities. In our congregation, I'll get back to that international students ministry. I have been so enriched by the kinds of questions that many, particularly Chinese students have. They come to Canada, they identify themselves as atheists. They're deeply, they've taken hold of a kind of evolutionary way of thinking about, very materialistic way of thinking about the world. They come to our church often just because somebody invited them to, and it's a good way to learn English if you can, and I have the gift of speaking fairly slowly and clearly, so international students like it because they can understand me reasonably well.
See, I got the other gift. I got the gift for old people because I'm loud. Even in seminary, I'd go preach in some churches and there'd be nobody there except a bunch of old people. They're like, we like him. He's loud. So
yeah. Actually, old people like me too because I speak slowly and clearly.
Oh, well, we're doing well.
We're doing well. Yeah. But when we would talk because we always have lunch after church for students when they come, and that's an important part of. If you come to church, you get a free lunch somewhere, and usually in people's homes or in our building. And so how many times haven't we had conversations about the meaning of life and how to understand religion, or how can we be certain of the things that the Bible teaches, or what does it mean? So international students have been just, I think, for not just for me personally, but for our congregation, because these students are often invited to our homes. People open up their homes for that lunch or whatever, and this is a place where we are permitted and encouraged to ask questions. And so, if the church can't be a place where people, express their doubts or wrestle with different ideas, then the church has lost a good part of its calling, I think. There's a cliche that all truth is God's truth. I mean, sometimes that has to be nuanced a little bit, but I think that's true. I think that God reveals his truth in science and various religions and in different ways of looking at the world. And so when people come with questions and looking for deeper understandings, I think in some ways there's a yearning for God's truth that's being expressed.
Okay. What now? You're Canadian. I'm American. I'm just kind of watching over the border, although Peterson's coming down here quite a bit.
Yeah.
What's gonna happen in Canada with this guy? I mean, are you guys gonna try and kind of put him in a box? I mean, he says if he gets arrested, he won't eat. I mean, what's gonna happen with you all up there?
Well, I wish I could tell you exactly. I don't know, but Peterson is definitely catching people's attention up here, and there are a number of people in mainstream media that are if you stereotypically, the media tends to lean left, and Peterson is identified as someone who's fairly right. So you'd expect the media to be quite critical of him, and a number of them have been, but there's also a number of well-respected journalists who are noticing Peterson and appreciating him, particularly around issues of freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression. Journalists care about that stuff. That's what they make their living.
That's true.
And here you have Peterson saying, we have to watch out that we don't allow an ideology to creep in and in the name of creating safe spaces, cut off certain kinds of speech or exclude that. So, he's been going on university campuses and talking and being well received by many, but being vociferously drowned out by others. There was an incident on Queen's University campus a number of weeks, maybe now a month and a half ago. If you see the YouTube videos of that, wow, people chanting and making noise, even breaking a window in the auditorium where he was speaking. So what's going to happen? Well, I do think more and more people are going to pay attention to what he's saying, partly because, we too I'm going to just mention something that happened fairly recently in our country concerning what's called the Canada Summer Jobs Program or grant. Organizations in our country can apply for a grant to offset the cost for hiring a summer student. And it can be any organization, but faith communities have made use of that for day camps or for different kinds of events that they host during the summer for kids and such. Well, the government recently required that any organization applying for this grant attest to a statement of values, which a lot of faith communities would say, we don't want to hire people to distribute brochures against abortion or to distribute views that speak against LGBTQ communities. but we're not prepared to make a value statement that we affirm, you know, a woman's right to choose, that we affirm same-sex marriages. We're not going to speak against them but we're not going to affirm them. And the government was requiring an affirmation of those kind of values. A lot of faith communities said, well, we can't apply then, and we're going to challenge our government. Now, in a way, you know, when a government requires organizations to make value statements, they're doing the kind of thing that Peterson has been warning about. You know, this is an overreach of our government to insist on requiring certain values that aren't actually charter protected, so to speak. You know, at least not a woman's reproductive right is not in our charter per se. But and I'm not quibbling. I'm not wanting to open that up but so what I'm saying is there's a confluence. You know, you have a bunch of faith communities that are saying, hey, the government is overstepping its reach here. Peterson, another voice, is saying, we got to be careful about governments that allow a kind of what he would say is a left-leaning, you know, neo-Marxist kind of view to creep in. So with that kind of confluence, I think Peterson will just get more attention.
Okay.
Yeah, so my sense is he's going to have an impact. My sense is on our next federal election, I could see that somehow his voice is going to affect, say, the right-wing party, which is our Progressive Conservative Party, and they're jumping on the free speech thing already a little bit. They're jumping on this attestation thing, So I think we don't know for sure, but my sense is he's only going to gain in prominence.
So some people want him to run for public office. Do you think he'll do that?
I hope he doesn't. I don't know if he has the character of a politician. But, hey, you know, I didn't think Donald Trump did either, and here you know, we can be surprised.
You had to bring up Trump.
I had to.
Nobody cannot talk about Trump.
I hope he doesn't get into politics. I think he's going to have more influence if he can lecture on campuses and do different talks and write and continue teaching. I think he's going to have a good influence in that way, but you never know.
Okay. And anything else you want to talk about, or any questions you have for me in this?
Yeah, well, I've been very intrigued, just as I've followed you a little bit on you know, Facebook and YouTube, how you've opened up some conversation space in your own church setting for people who watch your YouTube videos to come and talk a little bit about how Jordan Peterson's message has impacted them, and so I'm curious myself, you know, even from listening to you. How do you see some of the ways in which, you know, myself as a pastor can be open to allowing people who have been impacted by Jordan Peterson to encounter, you know, the gospel and encounter a Christian world and life view? I'd love to hear that. I don't know if that's the purpose of our interview, but
it's fine.
I'm curious about that. I'd love to see even, you know, something like that happen here if God would want that to happen. Yeah.
Well, early on I saw this thing starting and I thought, you know, so in some ways it's similar to, let's say, Billy Graham, and where Jordan Peterson and Billy Graham are in very different places. But, you know, Billy Graham would come to town, do a crusade, people would get all excited. You know, one of the things that Billy Graham learned very early on was Billy Graham had this, this platform where he would engage the churches and in some ways marshal the churches to, because the Billy Graham show would leave. And my concern is, you watch some videos, you get excited about something, you get an idea, you get inspired to clean up your room. Maybe you get inspired to, straighten out your life in one way or another, fix your marriage, drink less, get off porn, play less computer games, whatever. You get inspired, but we all know that inspiration doesn't last. And what I see is that the church offers a real community of real people in real time that people can live within. And so one of the things now obviously for a lot of Jordan Peterson fans, they're not confessionally Christian. They've got questions about even the existence of God. They've got all this stuff. But one of the things that I have seen in people is that there's a hunger to talk about this, to talk about Jordan Peterson, to talk about the way that he's changed their thoughts, the ways that he's changing their life. And so immediately one of the things, a friend, John Van Donk in Southern California, I was talking to him about this, and he says, you should go to meetup.com and start a meetup. And it's like, I need something else to do. I'm already making these videos. And he says, no, you should start a meetup. And so we've had 3 of them here. And I visited one in the Bay Area last Sunday night. And I think it is important for people to find each other, to have a way to talk through this. In a sense, what the internet offers is people on the extremes of any bell curve to actually find each other. But this connection through the internet is not like a person-to-person connection. I had one guy call me, and he might drive up from Fresno, which is not a small drive, to visit my church, and we'll probably do lunch after church. But he says, who can I talk about this to in my life? Because you're kind of like me. Your family's like, what are you listening to this guy for? And I don't have 3 hours to listen to his any bloody videos. I mean, come on. But this has been a very significant thing in not a small number of people's lives. And, so when I had my interview with Peterson last week, this is one of the things I really wanted to ask him. And I think he's just been on this status rocket. I mean, when he goes into these interviews, he's just trying to keep his own head together in this thing. But what about all these people that are in his wake, that are thinking about God and trying to put this together? And so I'm a pastor, and so I see this, and instinctively I think somebody's got to come alongside these people. And it's not about, I'm going to tell you what to think, or I'm going to get you to give money, or I'm going to, slam you into my organization. One of the things about Christian Reformed pastors, we tend to not be high pressure people. I mean, we don't cram on people. But my question and my encouragement, and some of the pastors in the Bay Area and such, I've been talking to them and saying, what would it be like to make a space for these people? And it's not intrusive. So when I do my meetups, it's really hard for me not to pray before the meeting, because that's so instinctive for us. But we talk about Jordan Peterson, and if asked, I'll certainly talk about it from a Christian perspective. That's what a lot of my videos are on. But I wonder where, and I have no idea where any of this is going, but shoot, we let AA groups, we let community organizations, we give all kinds of people space in church to do all kinds of good things. And I wonder what it would mean if churches opened their doors to some of these people and said, we're just going to give you space to talk. And we'll be conversation partners if you want us to be, and we'll walk alongside you. And I think that could be a big deal. And I have a heart for people when they come to me and they say, I've had a lot of struggle in my life, and I haven't been able to I haven't been able to, get a degree, and I haven't been able to build a stable relationship with, and find a spouse, and I haven't been able to keep a job, and I've struggled with substances, and I've got real issues with meaning. And I think, this, as pastors, this is our calling. These are people that, and now, especially in this group, we look at them and we think, we haven't had, the church has had almost zero traction with this, especially with scientistic, materialistic, atheistic communities. We haven't had any traction with this, with these people. And via this guy, people are coming to us and saying, I want to learn about the Bible. And I think to myself, and I think about, what I want to say to my Christian Reformed pastors who are colleagues, good grief, how do you not see this? So that's my pitch. And I know, you know as well as I do, some of our colleagues look at this and say, we shouldn't have anything to do with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And this is, for whatever reason they don't have any interest in that. And to me, it's like, all right, but don't stand in my way, because I think this could potentially be a movement of God beyond something that in the scope of Western history has been a terminal trajectory, where people get more and more secular, and then we haven't seen a lot turn around and say, hey, I'm interested again. And so to me, I've wanted to figure out why the turn, what's going on. So there's my spiel.
Yeah. Well, I'm encouraged by what you've done, and I'm sensing it's going to be a little contagious, maybe even for me. So, one of the things that I've shared with a couple of my colleagues that speaks at least to some degree the way that Jordan Peterson is captivating people. This is a young man in my church. He's 17. I know him really well. He knows that I've been listening to Jordan Peterson, and at first I don't think he cared too much about the fact that I was, but he's a video gamer, and somehow through the video game Twitch or whatever screen, he's another video gamer just happened to mention Peterson, and he's like, well, shoot, I know Andrew, and I'm going to listen to something. And so this young 17-year-old guy listens to Jordan Peterson for almost 45 minutes. And he talked to me and he said, that Jordan Peterson actually says a lot of things that we should be saying in the church, shouldn't we?
Wow.
He's talking about, and this was his language, he's talking about marriage, and he's talking about responsibility, and he's talking about, taking care of, the mess in your life. He says, that sounds a lot like what you say, Andrew, so I thought, well, here's a 17-year-old young man, and he wasn't that interested in Peterson. He has no real political interest, but boy, when he heard this guy talk, and he thought, and he said, it's a voice we don't hear at all anymore. Like, we don't hear people saying this stuff except in the church. We hear people saying, repent, or with theological language, but
right.
So anyways, this young man intrigued me, and I thought, wow, he's hearing some of this too, and so I agree with you, Paul, that Peterson is an interesting phenomenon, and if in the church we can help people find a place to talk about how they've been impacted, and as Christian pastors, we have this wonderful sovereign view of how God works in through all kinds of different people and experiences, and who knows how God is speaking through a man like Jordan Peterson, and so it's quite a phenomenon, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. Well, I really appreciate your time, Andrew, and your willingness to talk to me, and your willingness to tape this. You always say tape. Why tape? I'm so old. Jordan Peterson, I saw a video today, and he's like, people can't set their VCR, and he's talking to a bunch of college students. I said, they don't even know what a VCR is. anyway.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for reaching out to me too. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad we could have this conversation. And I'll put a link to your church in the notes so people can find you if they want to talk to you and are interested. And yeah, if you want any tips on how to start a meetup, let me know.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you, Andrew.
Take care.
Bye-bye.